It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I think we're going to start with you. And what a show. I think a lot of people thought they were tuning into Prime Minister's questions rather than a State of the Union address. We've got a couple of things to talk about, but let's start with Joe Biden and whether or not he had a good night.
Well, I think the president actually had a quite good night, probably better one than he could have ever anticipated. The combination of his speech, the Republican heckling, and if anybody watched it, Sarah Sanders' response made Biden look like an adult, like a president, and the Republicans, in my view, look like a bunch of fools. So I think it was a good night for President Biden. And I think it also probably set the tone for what we're going to see for much of the next 2 years. Biden's speech was good. If the Republicans had behaved, it would be probably been viewed as a pretty decent speech, but nothing particularly memorable. But the heckling made it much more impactful. And then Sarah Sanders, with her American Carnage 2 response, sort of reinforced the hecklers. Over my lifetime, I've been involved in a lot of responses to the State of the Union because for much of the time I was in politics, the Republicans controlled the White House. And my advice always was when we had to talk about doing a response was to give up the time and not do it because it's the president's night and you might as well let him have it and then go on to the next day. And there's a particular danger in writing your speech and then giving it as written before the response to the president's, or before the president gives his. And in this case, it was pretty interesting because you had Biden give his speech, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the leader of the Nutcase Caucus, screaming out, and the Republicans looking like a bunch of fools, crazy fools. And then Sarah Sanders defines the debate as between normal and crazy. And the only thing I was waiting for is Craig will remember this in his 1998 or 1988 speech to the Republican convention. Reagan talked about change and he said, "We are the change." When Sanders talked about crazy, I was waiting for her to say, "We are the crazy." But the tone, I mean, Biden was optimistic, she was pessimistic. He had, whether you agree with it or not, a substantive agenda. She was sort of the continuation of the woke, anti-woke politics with no platform like the Republicans in 2020. And Biden actually had a campaign theme, which was, we got to finish the job. The speeches also reflected the political strategies. I mean, Democrats have a big problem with working class voters, and Biden went right at them. But it was an effort to expand the Democratic coalition. In a sense, Sanders went to the same people who have been voting Republican, but she more or less doubled down on their base, declining base. She didn't do anything that would make anybody who wasn't already a believer in the anti-woke message to support her. So what does this mean in the long run? It probably doesn't make much of a difference. From Biden's perspective, he had a good night. He showed some vigor, but he was 80 years old before the speech. He's 80 years old after the speech, and his age is going to be a liability if he decides to run. But I believe the Republicans have a much bigger problem because they're crazy, misbehaving it's not just a one-night thing. They're going to do it every day. After the State of the Union yesterday, they held a hearing where the conspiracy theorists were trying to show that Twitter rigged the election against Trump in 2020. And it turned out that Twitter actually changed its rules to help Trump in 2020. So they're going to keep doing this every day. The reality for Republicans, and this is you had that great picture of Marjorie Taylor Greene yelling at Biden. That's the face of today's Republican Party. And because they've enfeebled the speaker with control of the House, they're going to be using the committees to reinforce that face every day.
Greg, can't wait to hear your thoughts, but even Mitt Romney got into the action, taking on George Santos. This is not the cool, calm, and collected party we know. What's going on?
First of all, let's go to Biden first. I mean, I think President Biden did what he needed to do. I think it came in different parts, though. I mean, it wasn't just a victory lap. It was kind of like a victory marathon. I mean, a recitation of every good statistic that could be derived with regards to the economy and, building the infrastructure and on and on and on. It gave the fact checkers, a real workout. But to his credit, most of the fact checkers either agreed with the statistic or said, well, it needs explanation, but it kind of is, generally on the mark. So I give him credit for, and deservedly, for trying to get a message out in the face of polling that says that the results are just not felt or appreciated. But he's trying to get a message out to the American people, and it was his speech to do it in. And I thought that was done pretty effectively. I also would say that the back and forth with the Republicans, which the Republicans walked into, they were like a setup for putting some scores on the board by Biden by leading him down a path, and then essentially kind of recognizing that, well, I guess we're not in disagreement on Medicare and Social Security. And it was an unusual night because of that byplay. It's not something you normally see. Biden handled it very well. I think, shouting at a president of the State of the Union and losing composure and having to look at those photographs of Republicans, chanting or yelling at him is not something that I would think serves their interest. The part of the speech was pretty, small with respect, or modest with respect to foreign policy, although he touched upon Ukraine and the importance there, and had the Ukrainian ambassador in the gallery. I thought actually the technique of placing people in the gallery that you can refer to was pretty effective. Although at times I think he either didn't have the last name, forgot it, or just chose not to use it. I'm not sure which, but he had so many people he was recognizing that pretty soon it got a little bit, he kind of moved past it. But I thought that part was effective. The speech, of course, was loaded with promises. I agree with Al. I got the feeling that we're laying out an agenda for the balance of the year, maybe even the campaign, in terms of what he wants to accomplish. The theme, our work is not done, is a good one for him. He's used it a lot. And he did kind of lay out what he wants to focus on. And so as I said, I think he did what he needed to do. He, more importantly than anything, he brought more energy to this speech than I have seen in a long time. So we'll go to Romney next. So Republicans sat there. Now Romney applauded a lot during the speech. It was one of the few, if only, Republicans to stand at times. I think he must have felt, as others did, that the president was definitely putting points on the board, and Republicans were not. And then I'm sure that was part of the frustration that caused him to take a shot at the congressman who's making less sense every day, but George Santos. But it's so he's entitled to it, and it gets caught on camera. Lastly, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I have to confess that first there was an odd thing, and I have not seen an explanation. Maybe Al, you have, but normally the response comes right away. You're kind of getting ready for the talking heads to respond to the State of the Union, and then they say, okay, now we're going to the other party's response. But there was a long delay, and I suspect the long delay was somehow related to Sarah recrafting the top of her speech, which seemed to me, you pardon the expression, seemed to be channeling Beth Dutton on Yellowstone. I mean, crazy. Beth talks about crazy. Sarah talked about crazy. I kind of like Al. I wasn't sure whether if we have two groups of people, crazy and normal, I wasn't sure which one she was signing up for in that speech. But then the speech began to be one, more of values and kind of addressing a little bit broader audience and rallying the troops. I like Al. If anybody asks me about giving a response speech after the State of the Union, I say, well, find something else to do. You can't win. You're up against a sitting president standing in before the Congress and the American people in something that's there's a pageantry to it, as opposed to sitting in your state capitol or wherever you choose to do this. It almost never works. I don't really know why they selected a former press secretary turned governor to do this. Although they like that phrase, the youngest governor and the oldest president. Well, okay, fine, that's true, but I'm not sure that the youth gave us the wisdom or the message, even for the party, that is going to give us the path forward we need. But that's just my view, and I hope that it works out for Sarah. By the way, fundraising messages hit my email box immediately from Sarah using the phrase, "It's a choice between normal and crazy." So I guess she likes the message, and we'll hear more of it from her and probably from Beth Dutton.
Well, Al, there's so much rich material here that I don't want to shut you off and go into another subject, but I am interested about the role of Mitch McConnell as one of the adults in the room, I guess. He's got, from anybody I've looked at, it seems like the 24 Senate races are going to be ones that the Republicans should win. And I'm just kind of curious about what your impressions are on the Senate side.
Well, being crazy doesn't help the Republicans in the Senate races. I mean, I guess I look at it, there's a Senate race up with Sherrod Brown in Ohio, which has been moving Republican, working class state. There's one in Wisconsin where President Biden went yesterday. Tammy Baldwin probably in trouble in a swing working class state. You have Joe Manchin in West Virginia, pretty tough race, no matter how much, as long as he's running on the Democratic line, he's going to have a very tough race. You got Tester, I think, is up in Montana. So my guess is McConnell would like to have, would in his quiet way, do what Romney did vocally. He'd like to strangle George Santos, and he'd probably extend the noose to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and every one of the crazy caucus, because they don't help him. They're, trying to prove that Twitter rigged the 2020 election. They ran that game in 2022 with a bunch of election deniers in the Senate, and they lost. I can't believe McConnell be happy about that. And he's going to be faced with 2 years of that. So he's got a tough job. It may be that the way these states are moving, they can get away with it, but I suspect it's that the House Republicans are going to be Mitch McConnell's greatest problem. You know, the Romney thing, I didn't hear what Santos said yesterday, but I gather he came back at Romney. Actually, you know, it wasn't so much after the speech. I think it was before the speech, because what Santos tried to do may have done, got there early, like a lot of House members do, and to get into the role where he'd shake hands with the president and everybody coming in. And Romney said, "You don't belong here. You don't really belong. You don't belong in the House." Romney said what other Republicans should, and what I'm sure Mitch McConnell believes. But McConnell's got a real problem with the House Republicans, and in the end, I suspect that will force him to work more with President Biden than he ever would have expected going into this 2 years.
Greg, you have the last word this time.
You know, interesting question. I think, though, you have to remember that it's going to be a presidential contest. And I think that McConnell, maybe he works with Biden. Biden certainly showed appreciation to Republican leadership in general at the beginning of his speech, and he singled out McConnell, who almost looked like he was surprised when the cameras hit him at that moment. But, you know, these two people have known each other for decades, and there are real issues, as we've discussed last week on the debt ceiling, that have to be resolved. And I think McConnell knows that part of the equation for bringing more Republican senators there and perhaps capturing a majority has to do with getting things done. The country is getting very weary of this back and forth, you know, process that they witness every night on television. They want something done. They want to feel some sort of economic relief. And so my guess is that to that degree, Al is right, that Biden and McConnell may well be the ones that forge some sort of agreement. But McConnell's challenge, I think, will be greater with respect to who's heading the ticket. It's going to suck a lot of air out of rooms in terms of this national presidential campaign. We don't really know at all who's going to head either the Democrat or the Republican side, but typically, groundwork would be laid now on issues that a Republican would be running on, but we don't know who the Republican is, and we don't know whether it's a Republican who's even interested in issues that McConnell's discussing. So I think Senate Republicans are at a striking distance for recapturing a majority, but I think it has a whole lot to do with the caliber of the candidate that actually makes it through this gauntlet of Republican primaries and becomes a nominee.
We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.